The hall of Virelian Palace shone with silver light from floating crystals that lined the ceiling. It was the day of the royal choosing, when the noble families from all across the empire came to stand before Princess Orenya and offer her their hands in marriage. She stood on the high steps beside her father, wearing a long gown that shimmered like moonlight. Her silver eyes were calm, but her heart was not. Each suitor stepped forward, bowed, and gave speeches about power, wealth, and alliances. None of them spoke about kindness or understanding. They all looked at her as if she were a crown to win, not a soul to know. Orenya smiled politely each time, though inside she felt smaller and smaller. When one warrior prince called her too gentle, the crowd laughed. Her father said nothing. Another suitor refused her entirely, saying that a woman with a heart too soft could never stand beside a ruler. The last one bowed, said he would not take a queen who pitied her enemies, and left the hall. His footsteps echoed until silence filled the air. The great doors closed, and Orenya stood alone in front of 1,000 eyes. Even her father's expression was cold, a mix of disappointment and pity. The ceremony was over. No one had chosen her. She walked out of the throne room, her long gown brushing the floor, her steps quiet but steady. Outside, the night wind touched her face. The twin moons hung above the sky, soft and pale. She had never felt so small in her life. The stars seemed far away, almost distant from her world. The guards followed behind, but she waved them off and walked toward the docks. That was where the human ships rested, simple gray crafts beside the golden fleets of Virelion. The humans had come to make peace, to trade knowledge and resources. Among them were soldiers, diplomats, and engineers. They were strange and fascinating to her people, seen as both primitive and brave. She had spoken to some before, but only in public events where every word was watched. Tonight, she did not care about royal rules. Down at the docks, sparks flew from a half-open engine. A man was kneeling beside it, wearing a plain jacket with grease stains. He was tall for a human, with short dark hair and calm eyes that looked kind even under exhaustion. His name was Daniel. He was not a noble, not a commander, not even a scientist, just a ship mechanic who kept the human fleet working. When Orenya stopped nearby, he turned quickly and almost dropped his tool. Sorry, Your Highness," he said awkwardly, standing straight and wiping his hands. She smiled faintly. "You know who I am?" He nodded. Everyone knows the princess who smiles even when no one else does. Her smile faded into surprise. "That's something I've never been told before." He blinked, unsure if he had said something wrong. "I mean, it's a good thing. You smile even when the world's being difficult. My people call that strength." She looked away toward the stars, her hands tightening on her cloak. "Where I come from, they call it weakness." For a moment, neither spoke. Only the hum of the ship filled the space. Daniel lowered his tool and sat back against the wall. "Then maybe your people don't understand what strength really is." Something about his calm tone reached her. She had met thousands of men who wanted her hand, but none who had ever spoken to her as if she were simply a person. The weight in her chest eased a little. She sat on a nearby crate, her long gown shimmering under the ship's light. "Do you miss your world, Daniel?" she asked softly. "Every day," he said. "But sometimes being far from home helps you see what really matters." "What matters to you?" she asked. He thought for a long time. "Doing the right thing even if no one notices." She looked down at her hands. "That sounds lonely," he smiled gently. "Maybe, but so is pretending to be something you're not." Her heart trembled at those words. It was as if he had looked through her royal mask and seen the quiet truth she had hidden for years. They talked for hours about small things, the difference between human oceans and alien seas, the way stars looked brighter from this planet, and how silence could be both peaceful and painful. Daniel listened when she spoke. He never interrupted, never tried to impress her. And when she laughed at one of his clumsy jokes, he looked at her like it was the best sound he'd ever heard. Before leaving, she said quietly, "You're not afraid to talk to me." "Should I be?" he asked. "Everyone else is," she whispered. "Then they're missing out." The next morning, the palace bells rang again. The royal council had called another gathering. The nobles demanded the princess choose her future, or they would decide for her. Orenya walked into the great hall, her face calm, her heart loud. The suitors lined the steps once more, each bowing proudly. Her father sat upon the throne, his expression heavy. "Daughter," he said, You must choose a husband for the strength of our people." Orenya looked at each suitor. Their eyes were filled with greed and pride. Not one of them looked at her with care. She could almost hear Daniel's voice in her memory. Doing the right thing even if no one notices. She took a deep breath. "I have chosen." The room fell silent. The king leaned forward. "Whom have you chosen?" Orenya turned slowly toward the end of the hall. Through the open doors, sunlight poured in. Standing there, fixing a small drone, was Daniel. His jacket was stained with oil, his sleeves rolled, and he looked completely out of place among the nobles. Her voice was clear and steady. "I choose him." The room erupted in disbelief. Gasps echoed like thunder. The nobles shouted, the council protested. Her father rose from his throne in shock. "A human? A mechanic? This is madness." But Orenya's eyes did not waver. "He is kind, honest, and brave. Those are the things I value, father. Not rank, not blood." Daniel froze where he stood, tools falling from his hand. The guards moved closer as if expecting an order to seize him. Orenya stepped down the marble stairs and walked across the hall. Her steps were light, but her resolve was firm. She stopped in front of him, looking up at his startled face. "Will you be my husband?" she asked softly. The hall fell into complete silence. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Daniel looked around, saw every eye on him, and then looked back at her. He saw the hope in her eyes, the trembling fear behind her courage. Slowly he nodded. "If that's what you truly want, princess." Then yes, the crowd broke into chaos. Nobles shouted that it was an insult. Some called it betrayal. Others whispered that maybe the old ways were changing. The king stood frozen, his hands gripping the throne. But Orenya smiled for the first time without pretending. She took Daniel's hand gently and said, "Then I am no longer alone." As guards moved uncertainly, the sunlight grew brighter through the windows, painting the hall in gold. The human and the princess stood side by side, two souls from different worlds united by something simple yet stronger than any crown: choice. The decision shook the empire like a storm across the stars. Within hours, every noble house on Verelion was talking about the princess who had chosen a human. Some called her mad. Others said she had been tricked. The Council of Elders demanded the king annul the choice before it could shame the royal bloodline. But Orenya refused to take her words back. She stood firm even when her father shouted, even when the court turned cold. Daniel, though unsure of his place in this world, stayed near her. He did not try to hide or argue. He simply stood beside her, silent and calm, as if his presence alone was her strength. Days later, the king ordered him to leave the planet. "The humans have no place in my family," he said. But Orenya's voice broke through the hall. "If he goes, I go too." The guards hesitated, and the king stared at her as if he didn't know his own daughter anymore. There was fire in her eyes now, the kind he had never seen before. Finally, he said nothing, and Orenya walked out with Daniel, her royal cloak trailing behind her. They left the shining palace and traveled to the far edges of the empire, to a quiet desert world where no one cared about thrones or bloodlines. Life there was hard but peaceful. Daniel worked as a mechanic again, repairing broken machines for local traders. Orenya helped grow crops and heal the sick with her telepathic touch. She had never known a simple life before, but now she found joy in it. Every morning she watched Daniel wake early to fix old engines that barely worked. Every evening he waited for her at the small porch of their home made of sand-colored stone. The days passed like that, quiet but meaningful. They were alone, yet they were not lonely. Orenya learned to cook earth food with his help, though she often made mistakes. Daniel laughed softly when she burned something, and she would frown, pretending to be angry, though her eyes always glowed with warmth. He taught her earth songs. She taught him the soft melodies of her world that could make flowers bloom in the dark. One night, as the twin moons hung low over the horizon, Orenya sat outside looking at the stars. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Leaving your people, your home?" Daniel shook his head. "No, I didn't lose a home. I found one." Her throat tightened. "Even if this peace ends one day." He smiled gently. "Then we'll face it together." Those words stayed with her. But soon they would be tested. Months later, dark ships appeared in the sky, royal carriers marked with the crest of the king. Dust rose as they landed near their small village. Soldiers in silver armor surrounded their home. Daniel stood in front of her without a weapon. his hands clenched but steady. Orenya could feel his heartbeat through the air. The commander stepped forward, his voice cold. "By royal order, the princess must return. The king demands it." Daniel spoke before she could. She made her choice. "You dare speak for her?" The commander said, his eyes narrowing. Daniel took one step closer. "I don't speak for her. I stand with her." The soldiers raised their weapons, glowing with blue energy. Orenya stepped forward and placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Enough," she said softly, her voice reaching into every mind around them. Her telepathic power flared like light across the field. The soldiers froze as if caught between fear and awe. "No throne," she said. "No crown, no bloodline is worth more than freedom of the heart." The commander lowered his head. "The king will not understand." "Then he will come himself," Orenya answered. And he did. Hours later, the great ship of the king descended, its engines roaring like thunder. The old ruler stepped down wearing his heavy cloak and a face marked with sorrow. He looked at his daughter standing barefoot in the sand, her gown dusty, her hands holding a human's. "This is what you left the crown for?" he asked quietly. "A man of another world? A life without power?" Orenya looked at him with calm eyes. "I did not leave power, father. I left pride." The king's expression shifted between anger and pain. "You think this man can protect you? Can understand what you are?" Daniel stood tall. "Maybe I can't understand everything, but I know how to care, how to listen, and how to fight for someone I love." "Maybe that's enough." There was a long silence. The king turned his gaze toward the horizon where the sun burned gold over the dunes. The people of the village watched from a distance. For the first time, the king seemed to see something beyond himself. His daughter was not weak. She had found the courage he had always wanted to see in her. But it came from the heart, not the sword. Finally, he spoke softly. "If you had stood before me like this during the ceremony, I would have bowed." Orenya blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. The king sighed, the weight of years heavy on his voice. "Perhaps your choice was not madness after all. Perhaps I have forgotten what love truly means." He turned to Daniel and said, "Human, you have shown more strength than most of my generals. I will not fight you." Daniel nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Your Majesty." The king gave one last look at his daughter. "Return if you wish. The gates will remain open." Then he boarded his ship and left the desert behind. For a long time, Orenya stood watching the sky where the ship vanished. She felt Daniel's hand find hers. "You did it," he whispered. She shook her head gently. "No, we did." Months passed again, and peace finally settled. The people began to speak differently about the princess who had chosen a human. The story spread across planets. They said the alien princess had married a man of Earth not for power, not for alliance, but for love, and that love had changed the heart of an empire. When the two worlds finally signed their great peace treaty, Orenya and Daniel stood together as symbols of unity. The ceremony was simple. No gold crowns, no royal speeches, just two people holding hands under the twin moons, watched by friends and strangers who saw hope where there had once been walls. Years later, their home became a place where humans and Varelians lived side by side. Children of both races played together, their laughter echoing in the warm desert air. Whenever travelers asked how it all began, the locals would smile and tell the tale of a princess who was once unchosen, and a human who said yes when no one else dared. Sometimes, Orenya would walk through the village and see young couples holding hands, whispering promises under the stars. It always made her smile. One night, sitting by the fire, Daniel asked her, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't spoken that day?" She looked at him and smiled softly. "No, because if I hadn't spoken, I wouldn't have found my voice." He laughed quietly. "You mean the day you chose a human over 100 nobles?" She leaned her head against his shoulder. "No, the day I chose myself." The fire crackled, the stars shimmered above, and the desert wind carried their quiet laughter through the night. The empire had changed, but what mattered most had stayed the same. The love of a princess who refused to be silent, and the courage of a human who stood beside her when the whole universe turned away. Their saint,